The lock clicked open with a dry metallic cough, and the door swung inward. Fluorescent light spilled across the linoleum floor and caught on the silver edge of the bolted table. The air smelled of antiseptic, of paper, of lives bleached clean. Naya stood waiting, palms pressed flat to the cold surface, her heart beating to the rhythm she had trained for years. Slow, controlled, never visible, Lisa entered like a faded photograph. Her blouse was too tight at the neck, sleeves buttoned to hide what they could not heal. Her hair was tied in a tired knot, and a bruised basket of oranges tilted on her hip. She set it down with a small thud that broke the silence. "Nia," she whispered, "how are you?" The hum of the ceiling light answered for her. Naya stepped closer until the distance vanished. Her eyes caught the faint bruise under Lisa's makeup, the smudge that refused to stay buried. She reached out, brushed the mark with 2 fingers. Lisa flinched. "It's nothing," Lisa said quickly. "I fell, my bike." "You fell," Nia repeated, her tone flat, "and only your eye broke the fall." Lisa's hands trembled on the table. The skin around her knuckles was split, the nails bitten down. Nia watched her, wordless, until the lie folded in on itself. The air thickened with the sound of the vent gasping above them. Somewhere in the corridor, a door slammed, and laughter cracked thin as glass. "Why the long sleeves?" Nia asked. "I don't like the sun," Lisa murmured. Staring at her lap, Nia took her wrist gently but with purpose. The tremor beneath her fingers told its own truth. She rolled the sleeve and silence filled the room. Faded bruises, yellow and purple, mapped the length of her arm, a record of ownership written in skin. Nia let the sleeve fall. Lisa's breath hitched. Then, as if a string had snapped, she fell against Nia's legs and broke into sobs that sounded like someone choking on years. "Help me," she said. "He hits me. His mother, his sister, they all do. They hurt Skye." Nia froze. The world slowed until even the flicker of the fluorescent light felt distant. She lifted Lisa by the shoulders, made her sit, poured water into the plastic cup and held it, until Lisa's shaking stopped enough to drink. "Tell me," Nia said, her voice calm and low. "All of it." Lisa's story spilled in fragments, jagged pieces of nights and mornings that no one had witnessed. At first, Darius had played the role, charming, protective, full of apologies, before there was anything to apologize for. But when she moved into his family's house, the walls changed shape. His bets lost him money. His rage found her face. His mother called her dirt. His sister, Trina, treated her like unpaid help. The boy, Julian, small and cruel, followed their example, spitting in Skye's food and laughing when she cried. The night before, it had gone too far. Darius came home drunk after losing again. Skye cried when Julian pulled her hair. He struck the child across the face. When Lisa tried to stop him, he dragged her into the bathroom. His mother held her arms, while Trina shoved a sock into her mouth. The world spun until she woke on the floor. Nia listened without blinking. Her silence wasn't absence. It was focus, sharp enough to draw blood. When Lisa finished, the room felt emptied out. Nia rose and faced the mirror on the wall. 2 faces stared back, the same cheekbone, the same mouth, the same scar above the brow. Only the eyes were different. Lisa's clouded, Nia's alive with fire. 10 years behind bars had carved the noise out of her, left only precision. "You didn't come to visit," Nia said, still watching their reflection. "You came to trade." Lisa frowned. "Trade? You stay here," Nia said. "Go out." Lisa shook her head. "They'll find out. The guards, the paperwork. They won't." "Nyakutin, you're quiet." "I've been quiet too. They'll call you better and move on." Lisa stared. "That place is hell." "Then it's my home," Nia said simply. She turned to face her sister. "You can't beat monsters if you're afraid to enter their cage. I'm not. Lisa's eyes filled again. What will you do? Whatever they taught me not to. The bell rang. Visiting hours ending. Naya moved fast. They stripped their clothes, folded them neat as evidence. Nia's hospital uniform clung to Lisa like borrowed skin. Lisa's blouse and jeans fit Nia as if they'd waited 10 years for her. Nia slipped the visitor badge from Lisa's pocket, examined it for a heartbeat, then tucked it deep inside her collar. Her hand brushed the patient ID tag with her own name, the one she would leave behind. She placed it under the mattress. Lisa stared at her, pale and shaking. What if they call your name? Then you don't answer. Nia said, you read, you eat, you sleep, and you wait for me. The guard's keys jangled beyond the door. Nia looked at her sister once more, then stepped back. The guard's eyes flicked to her face, then to the badge on her chest. Mrs. Rakes, he said, indifferent. You're cleared to leave. Nia nodded. The door groaned open. The corridor stretched ahead, white and humming. She walked with measured steps, felt the air shift as steel shut behind her. Then the next door opened. The outside world, too bright, too alive. The sun slapped her hard, the heat wrapping her like an animal's breath. She blinked, but did not stop. The sound of her shoes on pavement was the first sound of freedom. The visitor badge hung warm against her collarbone. In her pocket, the house keys pressed sharp crescents into her palm. The metal's weight felt like purpose. She boarded the bus without looking back. Through the scratched window she watched the world slide by. Laundromats, pawn shops, women carrying babies, the ordinary cruelty of daylight. Every mile away from the hospital was a breath of borrowed life. When she reached the stop, she walked the rest of the way. The streets narrowed. The buildings sagged. A mural of an angel, its paint peeling, guarded the corner. At the end of the block stood the Rakes' house, a relic of neglect. Rust crusted its gate. Weeds grew where laughter should have. The windows were half open, as if the house itself needed to breathe through its mouth. Nia pushed the gate. It complained, long and low. The air inside smelled of grease, rot, and something worse. Fear soaked into fabric. She stepped through the cluttered hallway. Each footstep sank slightly, sticky with old spills. A child's cry echoed faintly, then stopped, her body tensed. In the far corner, Skye crouched beside a broken cabinet. Her small hands clutched a doll without a head. Around the doll's neck was a red thread, tied with care that didn't belong to this place. A faint bruise marred her cheek, like a fingerprint left in flesh. Nia's throat tightened, but she smiled. Skye, she said softly, Mommy's here. The girl looked up, wary, her eyes searching Nia's face. Recognition flickered, confused, fragile, but she didn't move. The habit of fear held her small body still. Nia knelt and opened her arms. It's okay, she whispered, though the words trembled with something darker than comfort. Behind her, a voice drifted from deeper in the house, lazy and sharp. Crawled back already. It was a woman's voice, heavy with contempt, the kind that had never needed to raise its volume to hurt. Nia didn't turn. She straightened slowly, shielding Skye with her body. The quivering ceiling fan creaked overhead, slicing the silence into slow beats. A single fly droned near the doorway. Somewhere, footsteps shifted. Slow, deliberate, waiting. Nia's hand closed around the keys in her pocket. The edges bit into her skin until she felt the sting. Her pulse stayed calm, her breathing steady. In the stillness, the house seemed to lean closer, listening. The doll's red thread glowed faintly in the dim light. Skye's breath hitched. The floorboard behind Nia creaked again. She lifted her chin toward the darkness beyond the hall and spoke. low enough that only the walls and the ghosts could hear. The game begins now. The ceiling fan turned slow circles above the room, its blades pushing air heavy with the smell of oil and damp wood. The house was quiet, except for that rhythmic creak and the faint breathing of a child half asleep on the floor. Nia stood still, her back straight, her eyes open to the dark. The voice from the hallway, Mrs. B's voice, still lingered in the air like smoke, crawled back already. The woman had said, and now she stood framed in the doorway, her body wrapped in a floral robe faded from years of washing. Her face was long, lips pressed thin. The hand fan she carried clicked against her palm like a small metronome of power. Mrs. B looked Nia up and down, the pause deliberate. "No shame," she muttered. "You leave. You come back. Still useless. Go on. Wash those clothes. Fish needs cleaning. You think this house feeds itself?" Nia didn't answer. She only turned her head slightly toward the sound of Skye's breath. The child had tucked herself into a corner, her doll missing a head, but still wearing its red thread necklace. The girl's eyes were wide, fixed on the floor, too afraid to blink. Trina appeared next, all angles and noise. She moved like a person who needed to be heard before she was seen. Her son followed close behind, 5 years old and already copying her sneer. "About time," Trina said, folding her arms. "Dinner's late again." "What were you doing?" "Dreaming." She laughed and pushed the boy toward the corner. "Show her how it's done, Julian." The boy grinned. He bent, grabbed the doll, and yanked the red thread until it snapped. The sound was soft but sharp enough to make Skye's face crumple. "Baby's broken," Julian said. "Just like your mommy." Skye whimpered and tried to reach for the doll, but he shoved her shoulder. She stumbled, hit the wall, and fell. The women watched, neither surprised nor moved. The fans' creak counted each second of their silence. Nia stepped forward. Her movement was quiet, almost gentle, but her voice carried like a blade drawn slow. "Julian," she said. "Stop." The boy froze, confused by the tone. He glanced at his mother for permission. Trina smirked. "Go on," she told him. "Don't let her scare you." Julian lifted his foot, aiming a lazy kick. Nia's hand shot out. She caught his ankle mid-air, fingers wrapping tight. The boy gasped and fell backward, eyes wide. She didn't squeeze hard enough to hurt, only hard enough to show she could. "I said stop." Trina lunged, her nails flashing red in the dim light. "You touch my son." The rest of the threat broke off when Nia caught her wrist. The two women froze in a tableau of power, one burning with rage, the other perfectly still. Trina tried to pull free. Nia didn't move. Mrs. B's fan snapped once. "Who do you think you are?" she hissed. "Let them go, you filthy girl." When Nia released them, it was without hurry. Julian scrambled away, hiding behind his mother's legs. Trina rubbed her wrist, as if to erase the shock of being stopped. Mrs. B's breath wheezed. She lifted the feather duster high and brought it down with all the strength age had left her. The bamboo handle struck Nia's shoulder with a dry crack. Once, twice, a third time. Nia didn't flinch. On the fourth, she turned and caught the handle mid-swing. The old wood bent, gave a warning groan. Then came a crisp snap that split the air. 2 splintered halves fell to the floor. The sound echoed in the room. The first real sound of change. Mrs. B's mouth opened, but no words came out. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was charged like the pause before thunder. Nia lowered the broken pieces onto the table one by one. Her eyes met Mrs. B's. "Enough," she said. The word was steady, final. The fan's creak stopped. Just for a moment, Mrs. B's throat worked, but she couldn't seem to find her voice. Trina looked at the broken handle, then at Nia. "Who are you?" she whispered. Nia straightened. "I'm the woman in this house." she said. From now on, no one bleeds because someone is bored. The kitchen reeked of grease and old soap. The fish lay in the sink, dull-eyed, the stench of the market clinging to it. Nia rolled up her sleeves. She rinsed the fish clean, scraped the scales until silver glinted under the yellow bulb. Salt poured from the bag in heavy clumps, spilling more than sense allowed. She did not stop. She wanted the taste to burn. The pot hissed on the stove, spitting oil and smoke. The scent crawled through the house, sharp and punishing. Mrs. B coughed in the next room but didn't complain. Trina watched from the doorway, unsure if she should laugh or hide. When Nia carried the pot to the table, the fish was nearly black, the skin crisped to glass. Salt glittered on its surface like frost. She placed it in the center, alongside cold rice and wilted greens. Then she added one more plate, a smaller one, where she set clean rice and a slice of chicken she'd found hidden in the fridge. She placed that plate in front of Skye. Mrs. Bay sneered. "You feed the brat first. Teach her manners. Not greed." Nia didn't answer. She stood behind Skye, her hand resting lightly on the child's shoulder. "Dinner," she said. Mrs. B reached first, taking a bite of fish. The salt hit her tongue like electricity. She coughed, spat into her napkin, and glared. "What did you do?" she rasped. "You told me to make it salty and dry," Nia said calmly. "I followed instructions." Trina tried a piece and winced, reaching for water that wasn't there. Julian, wanting to be brave, chewed once and burst into tears. The sound filled the silence like a small alarm. Nia looked at none of them. She only rubbed Skye's back, while the girl ate rice in small, careful mouthfuls. The smell of chicken rose warm and clean against the sour air. "You think this is funny?" Trina demanded. Nia turned her eyes toward her. "No, it's fair. You sat at my table. You ate what I served. From now on, you eat what you sow." Mrs. B's eyes blazed. "Darius will hear about this. Then tell him," Nia said. She lifted the broken duster from the table and set it upright, the two halves forming a crude cross between them. "Tell him dinner is ready." That night, the house felt smaller. Skye slept curled under a thin blanket, one hand still clutching Nia's sleeve. The television glowed blue in the living room. Yves low, its light flickering like a heartbeat. Behind closed doors, the others muttered, their fear learning to shape itself into words. Outside, a motorcycle coughed to a stop. The sound rolled through the gate, heavy and certain. Darius. The engine died, and the night went still again. Holding its breath, he entered with the smell of sweat and gasoline clinging to him, his boots thudding on the wood. His eyes were glassy, the kind that reflect only themselves. "Water," he said. "Lisa, water." Nia rose from the bed, the motion slow and deliberate, the visitor badge pressed warm against her chest beneath the blouse. She stepped into the blue light of the living room. He turned at the sound. For a heartbeat, confusion flickered across his face. He was used to fear, wide eyes, trembling lips. What he saw instead was stillness, a calm he couldn't place. "I said water," he repeated, voice rough with drink. "Don't make me ask again." Nia didn't move. "Then don't touch me," she said. He blinked, thrown off by the tone. "What did you say?" Her eyes met his. "I said don't touch me." He laughed, but it was a laugh built from nerves, not amusement. "You think you're brave now." He stepped closer, his hand rising, ready to strike. Nia's hand met his wrist in midair. The sound that followed was small, a dry, decisive click as tendons shifted under pressure. Darius froze. The world seemed to tilt toward them, waiting. Even the ceiling fan stopped creaking. Nia held his wrist, her grip calm, her voice colder than the metal door she had walked through that morning. "You lost your last game," she said softly, This house has new rules now. The line hung there, suspended between them like a blade. Somewhere down the hall, a clock ticked once, slow and heavy, marking the exact moment power changed hands. The bones in his wrist shifted with a small, clean click beneath her hand. A sound as modest as a button, but as final as a lock sliding home. Darius blinked as if the room had dimmed. The fan above drew one slow circle and seemed to hesitate mid-groan. The blue light from the television held steady on the stained wall. His breath, steeped in sour liquor and night air, came up sharp, and then caught. He tried to pull back the way a dog tries a chain it has always snapped. Nia did not squeeze harder, did not even look like she was working. She simply kept his hand where it was. As if gravity had chosen sides, he swung with his free fist, a lazy drunk curve that used up its anger in the air before it arrived. She dipped her head a fraction and felt the wind graze her ear. When his knuckles passed, she stepped in close and lifted the heel of her palm under his jaw, in a short line that ended everything he thought he was doing. His eyes rolled up for a blink, and his knees forgot him. He brought his weight forward instead of his mind. The floorboards complained. She pivoted one foot, let his mass pass, took his hair at the crown and owned it, and folded her other hand into the soft place under his ribs, where air lives. The sound he made was a blunt thing. He bent, gagging between curses that could not find their way out. He croaked a word that tried to be an order and a plea at once. "Water," he said, as if water had ever been mercy in this house. She walked him down the short hall that smelled of mildew and old toothpaste. The bathroom light, a sick yellow. The enamel sink was shallow, a bite taken from an old tooth. The tap whined thinly, and then gave a cold stream that flashed bright against the chipped basin. He tried to set his feet and make himself heavy. Her hand at his hair did not care about weight. His fingers found the porcelain rim, then the air, then something like panic. "Do not," he managed, and fear finally pulled up a chair in his chest. She answered with movement, not words. She put him under. The first plunge stole his breath clean. The dirty water frothed under the faucet and slapped at his cheeks. He flailed, palms slapping porcelain and tile, legs jerking in a clumsy dance. She counted without thinking, the same steady counts she had pressed into midnight against iron bars for years. She hauled him up at the number and let him meet air. He sucked at it, coughing it into himself like someone learning a language. "Refresh yourself," she said, not unkind, and pushed him under again. It went like that. The second dunk taught his body the shape of obedience. The third taught his pride that it could not breathe under water. By the fourth, his hands stopped clawing at her arm and started feeling around for mercy, for any old bargain. "Please." He coughed when she let him up. His voice reached for the name he believed he could use as a key. "Lisa," he added, broken and slippery on his tongue. The name hit the tile and went dull. In the silver slice of the mirror above the sink, Nia saw the thin seam of the door and, beyond it, a smear of floral print, the quick white of an eye. Mrs. B stood there, pressed flat by cowardice. Behind her, Trina hung back with her mouth open, trying to breathe without making a sound. The seam narrowed. The door eased shut. No one entered. "You called," Nia said, steady as a metronome. "They did not come." He collapsed to his knees on the wet tile and retched into the sink he had used like a weapon. What came up smelled like the night he had just lived, and all the nights like it. He sobbed without tears, a man emptying out of his own mouth. When he tried to stand, his body shook with the kind of weakness that understands consequence. "Stand," she said. He stood, clumsy. He pressed one palm to his ribs, and startled at the pain there, like a boy who stumbles on the truth of his own body. The wrist she had held was swelling in slow bruise, a sleeve of warning blooming under his skin. He stared at it like betrayal. They went back to the living room. The television peddled a bright mop and brighter smiles. The fan found its weary beat again. On the couch the child slept. A soft half-sound curled against the blanket, the first full sleep she had owned in a long time. Darius lowered himself into a chair and made a noise he had not planned to make. "You think you can stay," he said. "Horse. You think you can talk in my house? You are nothing here. I am the mother of the child you struck," Nia said, and the sentence changed the temperature of the room. He reached for his old script and found it missing line. "You hurt my daughter," he said, and his mouth fumbled. "You make her cry. You make her afraid." She glanced at the corner where the girl breathed. "She is asleep," Nia said. "She is full. She is not afraid. You are—" He spat a small word and found it thin. He grabbed the bottle beside the chair and swallowed for steadiness. The burn gave him a belief in himself. For a second, he leaned forward as if leaning could be power. "Tomorrow I go to the precinct," he said. "I tell them you attacked me. I show this." He shook his wrist at her like evidence. "They will believe the medical reports your wife kept," Nia said. "They will believe the pictures she took when you slept. They will believe the mark on a child's face that fits a man's hand." She let the next sentence fall like a stone into a shallow pan. "They will believe the video if you make me make one." His jaw twitched. "What video?" he said, because questions are the last shields of men who have run out of shield. Nia looked at the phone on the table and did not pick it up. "You clocked out tonight. The supervisor can speak to minutes. Neighbors can speak to minutes. The world has clocks that do not lie for you. If you want to go to the precinct, we will walk together in the morning. I will bring paper and dates and the face of your daughter." His eyes changed shape. He was not drunk enough to miss the shape of the trap. He turned the angles in his head like a man turning a key that will not fit. Behind the hallway door, an old hinge whined. He looked that way and saw nothing that would save him. "Get out," he barked. "A last shove. Pack and go. Take the brat. Leave." "Not yet," Nia said. "Why not?" He threw back. "Because leaving now saves you," she said. "You would call yourself a man again by morning. You would keep your stories. We do not leave until the rules are learned." Silence sat between them like a heavy ant. Outside, a dog barked and another answered. The city went on, not caring about either of them. He tried again. Smaller. "Mother will not allow this." The house gave a dry little laugh from behind the door. His face flushed. "Go to bed," Nia said. "Tomorrow you wake. You keep your hands and your words to yourself. You go to work. You come home sober. You eat what is put in front of you. You sleep. If you lift a hand in this house again, I take you to the sink until the God in you learns about water." She turned away then, and the insult of her back made him spring. The bottle in his hand flashed. Her forearm met his wrist. The glass spun and fell and sighed into old shards on the floor. His other hand grabbed at her shoulder. She trapped his arm against herself and stepped under his balance. The room rose. The room fell. His spine met the boards like a lesson. The child murmured and settled. The mop on the television promised a clean life. "Sleep," Nia said, and this time the word closed a door. He did not obey, not immediately, but neither did he rise. He lay there and breathed the way men breathe after they realize they will live, which is to say, with shock and gratitude and hate all braided together. When he finally pushed himself up, he did not look at the hallway. He went to his room and shut the door as if he could shut the memory away with it. Nia gathered the wider shards of glass and placed them in the bin and wiped the floor until the smell of liquor thinned. She walked back to the kitchen. The laundry corner crouched there, a sour basin of clothes, the cloth heavy with old sweat and soap that had not won. She lifted the top layer and found them, the stained underthings that Lisa had been made to scrub by hand. She stared, and the old anger came up inside her, not like a wave now, but like a tide with a moon behind it. She set a small pot on the stove and filled it with water from the laundry basin. The smell rose at once, a low animal smell twined with cheap perfume and thyme. She lit the flame. When the water began to roll, bubbles punching and popping, she added the worst piece and stirred with a stick she found leaning against the wall. The steam climbed thick, a humid shame. She let it go until it was a broth, until the cloth had given what it would give. She poured the liquid into a chipped bowl and carried it to the living room. Darius had come out again, restless and raw, one hand at his ribs, the other rubbing his wrist as if he could bruise it back into pride. He stopped when he saw what she held. The smell reached him before the sight did. "What is that?" he said, though he knew. "A medicine," Nia said, "for husbands who gamble, for sons who mock their mothers, for men who drown women in sinks." He gagged, just looking at it. "You are sick," he said, voice gone thin. "You are a demon. Compared to what you did to a child, this is kindness," she said. "Drink, or we go back to the water." He stared at the bowl and then at her face and found no place to go. The hallway door clicked open a finger's width and then shut again. His shoulders slumped. She watched shame and rage fight and both lose. He took the bowl with both hands because something in him still knew ceremony. He raised it and the smell hit hard. He gagged. She did not blink. "Drink," she said. He drank. It went down in swallows that sounded like a fight. He coughed and tried to give it back to the world. She did not allow it. He swallowed again and again until the bowl was empty, and the room felt like a witness that would not forget. He slid to his knees, retching, tears and snot and spit-making tracks. The way a child cries when the lesson finds bone. "Enough," she said, and set the empty bowl on the table. He crawled toward his room without looking at her, and without calling for his mother. His hands left wet prints that would dry to salt. The door closed with a soft click. The house fell into quiet that had a different shape than before. Nia went to the cabinet above the television and reached to the very back where Lisa had told her she had hidden hope. Her fingers found a wrapped stack, paper wrapped in a plastic sleeve, the edges rubbed smooth by worry. She set it on the table and opened it. Medical reports, dates stamped in tidy black, a rib that had cracked under force, a nose, broken with a lie hung over it, bruises blossoming in ugly proofs, a picture of a small cheek with the ghost of a hand on it. Her breath did not change. She let the paper lie open under the blue wash of the screen so the room could read. Darius came back to the doorway in his shame and saw the stack. His shoulders dipped. His eyes changed from mean to hollow. He looked at the picture of the child and then looked away. "Tomorrow," Nia said quietly, "we take these where they belong." He nodded once because there was nothing else to do. Near dawn, Skye rose as small bodies rise when the world grows less heavy. She walked to Nia by instinct and leaned into her leg. Nia lifted her and the girl put arms and legs around her the way a small creature climbs a strong branch. Nia pressed her mouth to the fading bruise and simply rested it there. The kettle on the stove whistled a thin, hopeful note. Sparrows found the fence outside and argued about crumbs no one had thrown yet. Nia tied the broken red thread around the doll's neck in a neat knot that held what it could not repair. She set the doll beside the plate so it could watch breakfast. She poured water for tea and watched the steam climb like a straight line. The morning would be a hallway of doors. The sink had been one door. The bowl had been another. Paper and ink would be next. Then a knock. Then a badge. Then voices at a table. For now there was an egg in a pan and a child in her arms. and a house that had learned to be quiet when told. Morning entered the house like a careful guest, pausing at each doorway before stepping in. Steam rose from the kettle in a thin white ribbon. Rice breathed softly in a covered pot. The stale odors that had owned the rooms seemed to shrink from the cleaner scents, as if daylight itself were rewriting the air. Skye sat at the table with the headless doll beside her plate, the red thread retied in a small, stubborn knot that did not apologize for anything. She watched Nia move, wide-eyed and steady, the way children watch a bridge that has held through a storm. On the table lay the papers Nia had set out just after dawn. Plastic sleeves winked in the light. Page after page wore dates and neat stamps, a quiet procession of hours that would not argue back. Here, a rib described in clinical nouns, here a nose marked fractured, here the grainy grin of a cheap camera catching a bruise as it bloomed. The photograph of a small cheek, with the shadow of a hand, lived at the top, its 5 dark petals refusing to fade. The knock came like a command, 3 firm strikes, spaced as if measured. Skye flinched, and then looked to Nia. Nia touched the child's shoulder, a calm wait, and went to the door. "Police," a voice called. Flat with morning, Nia opened. 2 officers stood on the step, boots squared, radios murmuring the faraway business of other streets. The older one carried the day like a coat he had worn for years. He knew exactly where it pulled at the elbows. The younger one stood straight as a yardstick, jaw set to the idea of order. Both took in the room with quick eyes, and in that half-breath the house introduced itself. The kettle's white thread, the child at the table, the careful plates, the stack of paper like a low wall. "Mrs. Rakes," the older officer said, polite and watchful. "We received a complaint from your husband alleging assault. May we come in, please?" Nia said, and stepped aside. The officers entered, the house swallowing their boots up to the laces. The older one noted the headless doll and the way Skye's hand rested on its rag body. The younger one looked for broken glass and overturned chairs, and did not find anything that fit his prepared pictures. Darius came from the hallway like a man shoved by a wind he could not name. His cheek had gone the color of an evening sky. His wrist wore a slow bruise that was learning how to be seen. He pointed as if pointing could make his story true. "There," he said, voice bright with grievance. "She attacked me. She broke my wrist. She is crazy." The word floated above the table like a fly. Skye tucked her chin and shrank without thinking. Nia kept her palm on the child's chair and felt the shiver travel through wood and into bone. "One at a time," said the older officer, not lifting his voice, only leaning on time until it obeyed. "Sir, you allege assault. Ma'am, did you lay hands on him?" "Yes," Nia said. "He tried to strike me. I stopped him." "That looks like more than stopping," the younger officer said, heat quick in his mouth. The older one tilted him a glance that trimmed the edge from his eagerness, and turned back to Nia. "Do you have injuries?" Nia did not speak first. She lifted the top page and set it in the older officer's hands. "Medical report," she said. "Broken rib." The next page slid on top of the first. "Nasal fracture." He said, "I fell." "I did not." Another page. "Bruises recorded after examination." Photographs. She let the photograph of Skye's cheek fall last, face up, as if she were laying down a card that ends a game. The older officer read the pages the way a man reads weather, not for drama, but for direction. The younger officer leaned in, and when his eyes found the small face with the 5 finger petals, something cooled inside his posture. The older one set the stack down with a soft paper thump. He looked at Nia again. "Where are the newest injuries?" Nia rolled her sleeve to the elbow. Yellow, old, green middle, and fresh faint blue sat under her skin like a calendar. No one could tear from the wall. "Here." she said, tapping the inside of her forearm. And here, at the hairline, she lifted her hair and showed the tender place. The sink in the bathroom will show marks. He likes water when words do not work. The word water traveled through the room like a remembered draft. Darius swallowed. He tried to find anger again because it was the tool he trusted. She is manipulating you, he told the officers. Her sister is mad. It rubs off. Is that your daughter? The older officer asked him and did not blink. Yes, Darius said, chin trying to climb back to the height it had lost. Did you strike her? No, he said, too fast, too flat, as if speed could be innocence. The older officer left silence in the space after no, so the room could hear what the words sounded like alone. He turned to Nia. Who took the photograph? I did, Nia said. The camera is old, but the timestamp is clean. The note on the back matches the clinic reports. She turned the picture. The small, careful handwriting visible, date, spelled out, hour written in words, the place named like a vow. Chain of time starts here, she said, and the sentence laid itself across the table like a ruler. The radio on the older officer's chest hissed and then settled. He considered the kitchen as if it were a map. He looked at Darius and saw anger losing arguments with fear. He looked past him toward the hallway and caught two faces hovering like moths in a doorway. Mrs. B's mouth was a hard line without teeth in it. Trina breathed through her mouth and tried to learn invisible. The older officer placed one palm on the stack. The gesture had the air of claim and care. This is not nothing, he said. Sir, look at your wife. Look at your child. He tapped the top page with one finger. A gentle, undeniable tick. He drew a narrow case from his belt and clicked a pen free. The click sounded loud in the small kitchen. We are not opening cuffs in this room today, he said, voice even. We are opening a file. Names. Address. Notes flowed from the pen, a neat creak of ink. The younger officer found the rhythm and moved with it. If you choose to come down to the precinct with these, the older one said to Nia, the tone softening a half shade. We move from whispers to full voice. Bring the reports. Bring the photographs. Bring the neighbor note. Bring yourself and the child. We will take statements. A number will attach to your name and to his. A stamp will come down and the ink will dry cold. I understand, Nia said. The younger officer spoke now with his own weight. Sir, he told Darius, do not call us to punish a woman for surviving you. If we return because a hand was raised, the person wearing the hand leaves with us. If that hand touched a child, there is no talking at the door. There is a ride. Darius stared at the paper the older officer had already filled. His jaw worked without words. He reached for a last path he thought was his. She hit my mother, he said. She hit my sister. The older officer turned his head and simply looked at the two women at the hall. He read the fear there, and the fury that had no clean direction. He opened the front door a little and let morning come in, then closed it with care, as if he were measuring hinges. When he faced the room again, his words had the shape of a track being laid straight. Here is what will happen, he said. He lifted the form. This is logged as a domestic incident. With evidence provided by the victim, it notes the presence of a minor with documented injury. It requests a welfare follow-up. It advises all parties that further contact of a violent nature will result in arrest. He held Darius's gaze as he offered the page. Read it. Keep it. Understand that it reads you. The younger officer placed a card on the table by the sleeves. The number printed in small black patience. If you need help when it is dark, he told Nia, call. If you cannot speak, say nothing and set the phone down. We will come. He looked once more at Skye. His face did not offer pity, only witness. Then he nodded to his partner. The older officer tore the top sheet from the pad with a dry rip, handed it to Darius. and snapped his pen case shut. The snap sounded like a lid set on a box that would stay shut. They stepped to the door. Street sounds drifted in, a metal cart rattling, a voice naming a price, crows talking to power lines. The older officer paused with his hand on the latch and spoke to the room without turning. Make today different. Next time is not a warning. The door closed. Their boots thudded down the steps and faded into the morning. The hallway door breathed shut. The house listened to its own heart again. Darius stood and stared at the incident page as if it were a creature that might bite. He folded it and unfolded it and folded it again. When he passed Nia, he turned his shoulders, making himself narrower, as if height were something he could hide. He did not meet her eyes. Down the hall he went, a man who had learned a new verb for silence. Behind him, a breath heavy and shaky rose from the doorway where Mrs. B and Trina watched. Out of sight, paper rasped softly as if a fist had tightened too hard around it. Something tore once and then stopped. The sound strangled before it could finish the thought. Nia gathered the pages with the care of someone packing fine glass. She slid them home in their sleeve, edge meeting edge, and set the officer's card on top where it could not be missed. She washed the cups. She wrung the cloth until it did not drip and wiped the table in slow circles that calmed the wood. The smell of tea and plain soap settled like a gentler law. She went to the bedroom and tested the latch with her thumb. It clicked clean and quick. She set her phone in the corner, where shadow met wall, and ran the charger cord behind a stack of worn paperbacks. She checked the battery and slipped a spare pack into the pillowcase, where her hand could find it in one motion. She looked at the lamp, at the switch on the wall, at the line between dark and light that a finger could draw. Back in the kitchen, Skye finished her meal and pushed the plate to the exact center of the table, the way small children try to be perfect to keep the world kind. Nia kissed the crown of her head and felt that steady small heat under her lips. The house had heard a sentence spoken aloud and was still repeating it softly, like a prayer. It wanted to remember. Next time is not a warning. Night settled over the alley like a lid, sealing the house under a slow black pressure. Inside, the fan turned its tired circle and scraped once each time as if counting the hours by wound. The child slept on the couch, the headless doll tucked under her arm, the red thread knot resting against the small pulse in her wrist. Rice cooled in the pot. Soap clung to the sink in a faint, clean crescent. In the bedroom, the air held its breath and listened. Nia lay with her eyes open and her body quiet. The way a patient holds still for a needle, she had checked the latch again before dusk, pressed the metal until it answered with that small, dry click. She had looped the charger cord behind the paperbacks and tucked the spare power pack into the pillowcase where her hand could find it in one motion. She had tested the lamp and memorized the travel of the switch from dark to cold light. She had rehearsed the room in her mind until each edge stood where she needed it. Then she let the house speak. It spoke first in slippers and in breath, a whisper of cloth against tile. A careful drawer eased open and halted before the sound grew teeth. Rope slid against itself with a hushed leather sigh. Tape lifted from a roll in a thin tin rip and froze. The hallway smelled of dust and old closet, as if the plan had been stored for years and only now taken down. The knob turned. The door breathed. Darius entered first, big shoulders pulled tight to narrow himself, one wrist cradled, the other carrying the rope like a promise. Trina followed with the roll of tape silver as a fish, mouth set hard so fear would mistake it for courage. Mrs. B held a folded towel like a priest holds a book, an object meant to bless and to shut. "She is asleep," Darius whispered, amazed by a stillness he had never earned. "A sleeping woman," Mrs. B murmured, and sugar tried to cover the taste of bile. "Good. Tea now." Do not let the demon make a sound. Nia set her breath to a slow, even climb and let her eyelids fall to slits. Through lashes she watched the rope come, a dark loop rising, a line meant for neck and wrists. She felt the tug of their certainty, like a draft across her skin. Then the loop dropped and she rose into it. The rope met air and fell useless. She caught its middle and used his pull to bring him forward, stepped across his center, and took his bad wrist the way she had taken it before, not cruel, only exact. His breath left him in a stunned sound, half grunt and half question. She turned the rope, the room turned with it. Trina lunged with the tape, and Nia gave her one wrist, and then tilted, so the strip kissed itself, and trapped Trina's fingers together in a sticky cuff. Trina yelped at the insult, tried to jerk free, and the tape tightened like a bad habit. Mrs. B lifted the towel toward Nia's mouth and found the cloth turned gently back against her own chin. Nia twisted once, twice, without force, only with truth, and the towel learned obedience in her hands. No sound rose large enough to wake the child. Violence kept to a tight frame, small and controlled, like handwriting on a form that must be read. Darius came for the bed, with his weight and his height. A man believing mass will fix what mind has broken. Nia stepped aside a half shoe and let the rope guide him into the mattress. He hit and bounced and found his arms where she wanted them. In one clean pull, she had his belt free. Leather whispered from loops. In 3 motions, his wrists were crossed behind him, the buckle doing work it had not been made to do. Her knee pinned his hips with the discipline of a practiced stance. "Turn," she said, and the word had a shape he did not know how to refuse. He turned. "Ankles," she said, and tied the rope around bone and denim with neat, square truth. She looped the slack to the bed frame and tested the give. He tried to lift one leg and failed by the width of a thumb. He swore into the tight air and found the air did not change for him. Trina, teeth set, snatched back a ragged tail of tape and threw it at Nia as if a strip of glue could make a spell. Nia plucked it from its flight and laid it where it belonged, wrapping a second band over the belt, so the printed edge found its twin and sealed. Darius grunted once in outrage and once in fear, and then he saw fear reflected where he did not want it, and went quiet. "Hush," Nia said to the room, and the room obeyed. She took the towel from the old woman's limp hands and rolled it tight and slid it between the big man's teeth, with care not to cut and firmness enough to stop the old reflexes. He watched her over the cloth, anger drowned under humiliation, eyes bright with the shock of being seen without his armor. His throat beat against her knuckles, fast and frantic, like a sparrow against glass. The rope said no. The belt said no. The tape said no. His body listened at last. Nia stood. The women drifted backward as if a quiet wind pressed them toward the hall. She did not follow. She laid the cracked lamp gently on its side, so the little blue wash fell down and not out. She slid her phone from its shadow cradle and opened the camera. The red circle swelled beneath her thumb and held. A small scarlet eye woke in the corner of the glass. In the doorway, she tucked the phone into the crook of a shoe, lens peeking along the join of threshold and floor. It saw the bed, the rope lines, the gag, the shine of tape, the doorway where action would arrive. In the top corner, the time began to write itself. Neat figures counting forward like a witness that never blinks. Nia drew one deep breath and let it leave with a tremor she did not feel. Then she let her voice scatter like frightened birds. "Help!" she cried, high and thin. "Etienne, he is looking for a knife." The words found the ears they were meant for and lit old fires. Trina's eyes flared bright with a heat she mistook for power. Mrs. B's mouth shaped a command, and believed it was justice. This was the song they knew. They ran toward the chorus. "Bedroom," Nia gasped and stepped aside. They rushed past her the way floodwater finds a low place. Sticks in hands, rage lifted like a flag. Trina carried a cut mop handle burned smooth by palm. Mrs. B gripped the bamboo from the laundry line, knuckles white as old bone. The hallway was a narrow throat, and their breath scraped it raw. The door swung to their shoulders. The dark pressed close and familiar. They saw a body trussed to the bed. They saw a mouth gagged. They saw the rise and fall that promised breath. Saw a shape they had spent years practicing on in smaller ways. They swung. "D, you filthy thing," Trina hissed, and brought the stick down. The sound was a fat, wet thud wrapped in wood. It came again and again, a rhythm learned in secret, and now performed at volume. Mrs. B struck low, knees and ribs and hands, the pole kissing bone with a mean little tap before the heavy land. The towel swallowed the first cry and the second. The third crawled out as a whistled grunt that did not sound like triumph. Sweat and fear and the sour of old cloth rose in the air. "Do not stop," Mrs. B panted. "Beat the madness out. Hit until it learns." The phone's red light kept its patient blink. The timestamp walked forward, a small, relentless footfall. In the living room, the fan scraped its single faithful scrape. The child turned once and sank deeper into sleep, breath steady against the doll's rag shoulder. Nia watched from the doorway with a gaze as flat and calm as a sheet of winter water. She did not smile. She did not look away. She counted to a number she had chosen while the sun was still up. She located the wall switch by memory and by touch. Her fingers found the thin rectangle of plastic, and the notch where dark ends. She flipped it up. Light hit the room like a verdict, cold and absolute. The sideways lamp threw a second plane, so shadows rose like wrong answers and stuck to the ceiling. Trina froze mid-swing, mouth open around a word she could not finish. Mrs. B's pole sagged, its tip kissing the floor with a small, ashamed clack. Their eyes widened and then collapsed inward, as if the light had punched through them. They saw Darius. They saw the belt and the rope and the tape and the towel. They saw his eyes tell them who he was. In that moment, not the man they had built, but the body they had undone. They saw the truth standing up in the middle of their story and speaking without sound. At the foot of the bed, a small red eye stared from the floor and did not blink. Nia stepped fully into the frame, a straight line drawn across chaos. Her shadow fell over the sticks in their hands and over the tied man on the mattress. In the stillness that followed the bright slap of light, even the fan seemed to pause between scrapes to hear what would be written next. "Hello," she said, her voice level and dry as a ruler laid on paper. "Shall we begin the lesson on who has been doing the hitting?" Light pinned the room open and would not blink. Trina's stick slid from her fingers and struck the floor with a blunt report that seemed to roll beneath the bed and die under the far wall. The old woman lowered her bamboo length by inches, the way a storm surrenders only when it has run out of sky. On the mattress, the bound man stared over the white gag, breath scuffing the cloth in short, frightened strokes. Pride had left his face. Understanding, new and raw, had taken its place. Nia did not rush the moment. She let the light do its quiet work. She let the small red eye of the phone stare without mercy from the doorframe. Then she moved only enough to lift a split rod of old cane from the table. She touched the cool edge to his cheek as if measuring. He flinched from the memory inside the touch more than from the touch itself. His gaze crawled to his mother and his sister and then slid to the floor where the phone kept its steady blood pulse. "Enough," Nia said, level as a line drawn with a ruler. "Drop them." The old woman obeyed first. The bamboo tipped and clapped once on the tile. Trina held on for half a heartbeat, as if her hand could not remember how to be empty, then let go. The handle fell with a dull thud that sounded like certainty, finally admitting it had been wrong. Nia bent, drew the shoe with the phone a hand's width into the room, and tapped the screen. The red wink went still. The numbers in the corner froze into a stamp of time. She did not smile. She tapped again. "Police," she said. Voice even, the voice of a nurse reading a chart. "East Side, narrow lane, domestic assault in progress. The victim is bound and injured. Aggressors present and armed. Send an ambulance." She set the phone on the dresser, speaker open, so the house could hear that the outside world had been invited in. Sound arrived first as a toy far away, then as a grown siren that leaned its way down the alley and painted the walls in watery bands of blue and red. Sleepy windows lifted a breath to look. A dog began to bark and then thought better of it. In the living room, the fan kept its slow circle, and its small scrape, the old metronome marking out the last seconds of a long night. Nia reached and pulled the towel from the bound man's mouth with 2 fingers, careful not to tear the skin that fear had already torn inside. He sucked air like money and swallowed the taste of cloth. The first thing he said was not a word. The next thing had a name buried in it. "Mother." He managed, then another. "Trina." Silence tried to recover itself. The siren turned into the mouth of the lane and grew larger. Tires whispered on old wet patches. Doors thudded with the practiced beat of people who step into trouble for a living. The older officer entered first, lines at his eyes, a measured posture that said he had walked through houses like this and left them carrying the same shape of truth. The younger came close behind, glance quick and methodical. Mapping bed, rope, tape, sticks, faces, phone, light, corners, exits. 2 paramedics hovered at the threshold with their bags, their hands already quiet. "What happened?" the older officer said, "not to doubt, but to open the gate that consequence walks through." Nia did not testify with a speech. She lifted the phone, and her thumb pressed play. Darkness filled the room again in sound only. Breaths quickened. A gagged grunt whistled. Wood found flesh with sick weight. The old woman's voice climbed with the heat of permission. In the corner, the timestamp wrote time like a clerk who will not accept a story without ink. The older officer watched and did not blink. The younger swallowed and kept his hands still at his sides. "That is enough," the older man said, and the air around his words chilled. He looked to the women. The old woman tried to shake, as if a tremble could undo the past 3 minutes. Trina opened and closed her mouth like a fish, and found there were no little clever excuses left for her to chew. "Hands," the older officer said, "wrists together." The younger stepped forward. The cuffs closed on the old woman with a crisp click that sounded like a door finally fitting its frame. Trina flinched, as if the metal had bit her own wrist. A second set of cuffs wrote the same decision on her skin. "No," the old woman cried, finding her voice full of blame. "She deceived us. She tied my son. She is mad. She escaped. We were saving him. We were saving this house." Her eyes kept jumping to Nia and back to the officer, as if a shelf might appear to leap toward. The older officer nodded at the phone. "That recording will not agree with you," he said. "Your son is tied. That is true, but it is your sticks that did the writing on his ribs, and your words that hung the permission in the air. That is also true." The younger leaned near the bound man. "Do not move. We will cut the tape." Gloves slipped on. Scissors mouthed the silver glue and spat it out in long, harmless tongues. The belt came loose. The rope slackened. The body turned by inches, heavy and humble. "Who hit you in this room?" the older officer asked, voice even and official, the way a form asks and expects ink. "My mother," the man said. "And Trina, say it again," the officer said, because ritual burns truth into the page. "My mother," the man said, "and my sister." After that, his breath sounded like surrender. The paramedic slid the board beneath him, folded the sheet, and lifted. Straps crossed his chest in sober lines. A light moved over his pupils. Fingers pressed a bruise, and he winced and stared at the ceiling, until the ceiling blinked first. "Chain of custody," the older officer said, turning to Nia with a small, clear bag held open. "The phone, please, we will log it. Copy it. Return it." He offered the bag with the respect of a tray. She slipped the device inside, the seal whispered shut, promising that fear would not be allowed to edit. Neighbors pooled at the door in soft shoes, mouths half open, eyes fat with surprise and appetite. The older officer raised one hand. The tide stopped at the sill and pretended it had only come to smell the weather. Someone whispered that the house was finally telling the truth. Someone else whispered that the truth had shouted for years, and nobody had wanted to lend it a name. The younger turned Trina toward the hall. His tone was low and exact, the tone of a locked door. "Felony assault," he said. "Use of a weapon. Conspiracy. If a plan can be shown." The words settled like bricks across a path. The old woman tried one last flare. "She is mad," she insisted, chin up, nodding toward Nia. "She escaped. She stole my order. She is a demon. You know demons and what they do." "What demons do," the older officer said, gaze steady, "is often to hide as mothers who teach sons to strike." He looked at Nia then, a sober respect under the work. "If you wish to press charges now, we can begin the paper this hour. If you prefer to wait until a divorce is filed and your safety is set, we can hold the video under seal and open it at your word. Both paths are lawful." He did not hurry her answer. The stretcher rolled, bumped the jam, and the man flinched at the bump in a way he had not flinched at other things on other nights. Nia stepped aside to let the wheels pass. She did not gloat. She did not soften. She made space because the world was moving, and she had made it move. She glanced to the couch. Skye slept. Small hand curved around the red thread, as if holding a tiny sun. The fan's scrape did not wake her. The air was finally the kind that lets a child keep sleeping. On the table, a neat sleeve of papers waited like tools laid out for the morning. The older officer noticed the glance and dipped his head once, understanding without needing to pick each page up. "We will secure the video," he said again. Softer. "Do you want to press charges tonight or after the divorce is signed? Either way, next time is not a warning." She let the words ring like a bell and fade. She breathed, felt the simple travel of air through a chest that had earned its calm. She thought of forms, of dates written in words, of a stamp coming down with cold ink. Then she looked at the hallway where the paramedics turned. At the open door, breathing a stripe of siren light onto the floor. "Wait," she said. "Hold it under seal. Papers first." "Understood," he said, and the word meant more than agreement. It meant a road would still be there when she stepped onto it. The younger guided the cuffed pair forward. Trina's face had the flat water look of a bucket left in the rain. The old woman tried to drink the room with one last glance, as if objects might leap into her arms, as if the house might change its mind at the last possible second. The cuffs tugged and taught her again how narrow a wrist can feel. Outside, the siren dimmed itself to a heartbeat and then to memory. They paused at the threshold. The older officer held up the evidence bag a little. Its plastic, catching a clip of light, her reflection bent inside it. "One more thing," he said, mild and firm together. "If anyone calls this house to claim an escaped patient, Dispatch will confirm identities against records and assessments. We do not collect people because families panic. We collect evidence. Do you understand? She inclined her head. Gratitude, Rose. Metallic on her tongue, she swallowed it into steadiness. For a breath, they stood inside a quiet that finally felt clean. The fan kept time without sounding like a threat. The older officer set a card on the table with 2 fingers, a small white oath. "Luck," he said. "Rest. If anything scratches at your peace, say my name to the line." Boots stepped away. Wheels rattled down the lane. Voices thinned into the night. Nia crossed to the couch and brushed Skye's hair from her brow. Warmth lived there, ordinary and fierce. The child sighed and turned toward the hand. Nia walked back to the bedroom. The lamp still lay on its side, casting a low pool of blue. She set it upright and let the room soften. On the floor, the sticks and the tape lay like the shed skins of bad habits. She towed them toward the corner. Not yet to the trash, but away from the bed where a child might look. At the door, the older officer paused with the sealed phone. He glanced from the bag to the bed to Nia. "Do we need to play it again?" he asked. Not quite a question. Nia looked at the bag and at the room and at the small sleeping shape beyond the doorway. Her mouth tilted. No joy, no malice, only a simple acknowledgement of a job done and a road waiting. "Play it again," she said, voice low, "then lock it away." Dawn thinned the alley to a pale ribbon, washing the last of the blue from the night, and leaving the house to its new quiet. The fan still turned and scraped in its tired circle, but the sound no longer prowled the walls. Skye slept on the couch with one hand curled around the red thread, cheeks soft, breath even. Nia stood over her for a moment and felt a steadiness in her chest that did not need to harden into fire. She moved through the rooms without haste. In the kitchen, she opened the old refrigerator and found the little bowl of rice that Lisa had tucked away for the child. She warmed it, cracked an egg, stirred with a pinch of salt and a few torn leaves of green. The pan sang and then settled. When the food was ready, she covered the plate to keep the heat and set a cup of clean water beside it. Then she picked up a heavy trash bag and began to clear the night by hand. She pulled the wide strips of tape from the table and rolled them into a hard gray knot. She gathered the snapped bamboo and the splinters that had flown, the torn towel that had silenced a mouth, the rope that had promised control and learned different. The cheap lampshade split at the seam. Each piece dropped into the bag with a small final sound. She tied the knot tight and set it by the door. At the sink, she let the tap run until the sour smell of the drain gave way to the cold, honest scent of water and metal. Skye stirred and blinked awake. She looked for threats out of habit, and then found only Nia. She rose and climbed into her arms, small weight warm against Nia's collarbone. "Breakfast," Nia said softly. The child nodded. At the table, she ate the rice and egg with quick, careful motions and peeked at Nia after every few bites. When the fan clicked, the child looked to Nia again and, finding her face calm, returned to the plate. When the last grain was gone, Skye put the spoon down with a neat little tap and drank her water. She licked her lip and hesitated. "Is he gone?" she asked, not shaping a name. "He is gone," Nia said. "He will not come through this door today." "Will they come?" the child asked, that old plural heavy as a bruise. "Not today," Nia answered. "And when they do, they will not come like before." Skye slid from the chair, went to the corner, and picked up the headless doll. She touched the raw neck with a small frown and then smoothed the red thread as if it were a ribbon on a crown. Nia tucked that image away like a note for a later hour when hands could mend what fear had broken. On the table, the sleeve of papers waited. Nia opened it, counted the reports by their edges, touched each photograph, checked every date, and put them back in order. She laid the sleeve beside the house keys and the visitor card from the hospital. 3 objects, 3 doors. She looked at them until the plan in her head felt as simple as walking. She would not leave the child alone. She would not bring her back to the ward. There was a clean path between those truths. Nia took the card the older officer had left and dialed the number. The voice that answered was steady and awake. "I need an escort for a short errand," she said. "To the hospital and back. I have a child with me. The house is calm, and the evidence is already in your chain." The officer said a car could come within a short while. "Thank you," Nia said, and hung up. She packed a small backpack for Skye, a clean dress that did not itch, the tiny blanket that held the smell of safety, a comb, a buttered slice wrapped tight, the red thread she left in the child's hand. She tied the straps with a soft double knot. The knock at the gate came with courtesy rather than force. The older officer stood there with a new partner, a woman with eyes that took in rooms without raising any dust. The car waited at the mouth of the lane with its lights quiet. Neighbors lifted brooms and buckets and watched the way people do when the world might be turning and they do not want to miss the sound. "We ride to Crestwood and back," Nia said. "No drama. Only paper and faces." The older officer nodded as if he had already placed the blocks in order. Skye climbed into the back, and the partner buckled her in with a small smile that did not startle. Nia settled beside her. The car slipped out of the alley. Morning opened like a hand. A bakery let warm air into the street, and the scent of bread rode in the car and sat gently with them. Crestwood rose in the light, white and squared and trimmed. At the desk, a nurse looked up before the bell could be touched. She had met both sisters in both rooms. Her gaze moved from Skye to the visitor card to the face that now wore its calm like a fitted coat. "She is ready," the nurse said. "She has been reading since early morning. She made a list with little boxes and has been checking them." The smile looked new. This last sentence held a quiet pride. They walked the hall. The clock ticked with the soft authority of a metronome. Lisa stood when they entered, the book closed in her lap. The two faces met, not mirror and reflection, but two women who had carried each other through a burning room and arrived with their hands unblistered. Skye ran and climbed and wrapped herself around Lisa's neck. Lisa held her and breathed her in like summer rain. The nurse looked aside with a small protective courtesy. "Your face looks quiet," Lisa said to Nia. "Your hands look like plans," Nia said back. Glancing at the clipboard with its neat boxes, they sat for a brief moment that felt wide. Nia set the visitor card on the table. She slid the house keys beside it. Cool teeth against wood. She placed the sleeve of papers within reach. Then she lifted the patient's shirt from her bag and laid it over her arm. She held it not as surrender but as consent. "Whatever we do now, we do in light and on paper," Lisa said. "No more shadows, no more bargains paid in hurt." "Then we do it that way," Nia answered. "You walk out with your child and with your name. You file. The officer holds the video and chain. I walk back in for one more day under mine. Tomorrow we exchange again because we choose it." The nurse set a clipboard on the table. The pen clicked. Lisa signed where the line asked for a mark. She did not glance away. Her hand did not flutter. The strokes were clean and final. She lifted the keys and closed her fingers until the metal pressed a small print into her palm. Not a mark of fear, but a mark of possession. The older officer signed the custody line for the evidence. The partner watched the hall and the window, a quiet sentinel. Lisa gathered Skye on her hip and tucked the visitor card into her pocket. She touched the sleeve once, measuring its weight, then looked at Nia and at the nurse. "If anyone calls with a story," she said, "I trust you will check paper rather than panic." "We have learned," the nurse said, and her smile carried both apology and promise. In the corridor, the far door stood open a breath, showing a stripe of sun and the clipped green hedge beyond. Lisa stepped into that light with the child. She did not look back until she reached the line where the corridor ended and the day began. Naya watched until the red thread flashed once on the child's hand and then vanished into the bright. She handed the patient's shirt to the nurse and took the cotton back onto her shoulders. The fabric lay there with the weight of memory, without the weight of shame. "Tomorrow," the officer said. "Tomorrow," Nia answered. "Paper first, ink next." He left with the partner, and the room returned to its old quiet. Nia sat on the cot and stretched her fingers. They felt strong and clean, not coiled. The window held a square of dove-colored sky. A bird dropped to the sill, tilted its head at the room as if listening for anger, heard none, and flicked away. The nurse straightened the chair and set a thick book within reach, a book about how people keep their shape when the world presses from the wrong sides. Nia lay back and looked at the ceiling. The old ache in her temples had softened into a seam that would hold. She breathed without counting. With her left hand, she slipped 2 fingers under the collar of the shirt and touched something small she had placed there before she left the house. One loose hair from Skye caught in the red thread, a token no court would list, and no chain of custody required, proof only to the heart that the work had meaning and a future. She closed her eyes. Sleep came like a room she could enter and lock from inside. On the table, the clipboard waited, and the pen, and the quiet promise that certain words, once written, do not wash away. Justice would sign, and the ink would stay, and she would be ready when the world called again. Morning arrived without ceremony. A thin, pale band of light sliding along the baseboard and climbing the wall like a quiet tide. Lisa stood in the precinct corridor, with Skye's weight on her hip and the sleeve of papers snug beneath her arm. The old officer eased a conference room door with 2 fingers, not pushing, just making room. His look said, "This will not hurt if you let it." The table inside wore old scars under fresh polish. A small recorder sat at its center, its red eye sleeping as if it, too, waited for the right word to wake. "You are ready," the old officer said. He did not raise his voice. He did not have to. Lisa nodded once. The house keys pressed a faint map into her palm. She let them do it. She had learned the worth of marks. They took their seats. The partner officer parked in the corner with a pen she barely touched. A clerk rolled in a cart that smelled of toner and lemon and the long patience of offices. Folders, a laptop, a seal press that looked like an iron bird. The clerk's sweater was navy, the practical color of people who never make the story about themselves. The door opened again. Darius entered with a brace beneath his shirt and an expression that reached for its old swagger and found a fine powder of nothing. A public defender shadowed him, coat shiny at the elbows, eyes already tired of tomorrows. Trina trailed behind, Yafset, mouth flattened into an old grudge. The empty chair at the far end waited without apology. The old officer's glance acknowledged it. The room did not. "We will do this here," the defender said, as if a hallway could bless them. "Light is a witness," the old officer replied. He set a fabric pouch on the table and unzipped it just enough to show the edge of a clear evidence bag and the neat label on a small drive. He closed the pouch again. "Chain intact," he said. His voice put a period on the table. Lisa slid the sleeve from under her arm and set it down with both hands. She drew out a stack of reports and photographs and arranged them with habit born from years of collecting proof no one had wanted to see. She did not fan them like a deck. She aligned corners, She gave the past the dignity of order. "I will file for dissolution," she said to the old officer, then turned to Darius as if address were a kind of justice. "I will seek full custody and protective orders. I will secure support. I will return the marital gift my parents provided and make it clean on paper so no one can pretend they did not hear." The officer nodded once, the kind of nod that recognizes work done before this room and work that will begin because of it. Darius cleared his throat to find the old script. The sound that came had the shape of a protest and the air of surrender. He looked to the empty chair, expecting a mother to arrive with old armor and louder names. The chair stared back. No miracle, no myth, only wood. The clerk slid a form toward Lisa. Name, date, grounds, relief. The pen made a small, certain sound across the paper, a seam drawn straight and pressed flat. The clerk slid a second toward Darius. The defender murmured, "Acknowledge service. Fight later if there is anything left to fight with." Later arrived and sat down next to him with folded hands. A knuckle tapped the doorframe. Mrs. Bell stepped in, hair pinned with a clip missing a tooth, dressed loud to drown a heart that would not still. She carried a canvas tote that sagged with a weight the room recognized. Before it saw, the old officer gestured her to the empty chair. She sat without looking at Lisa, then stared at the table as if it might tell her how not to drown. "There were funds," Lisa said, her voice steady. "A settlement from your husband's accident. You held it off the books. You told yourself it was safer there, where the ground could keep a secret." She did not say shed. She did not say split wood or the board with the nail worn smooth by hands. She did not need to. The tote shifted against the leg of the chair. An old smell rose. The tired breath of plastic and dust and saved things. Trina's eyes snapped to it, and then away. A flinch that betrayed more than outrage. Darius's fingers twitched, hunting for a lie with enough bones to walk. None came. The partner officer's tone was almost kind. "Families love secrets," she said. "The law loves sunlight. We are here for the second love." The clerk placed a simple consent form in front of Mrs. Bell. Voluntary disclosure and transfer. No force, no Zeitzuri. Clean paper for a clean record. The signature line waited like an empty doorstep. Mrs. Bell's chin trembled once, a small earthquake years in the making. Her hand went to the tote. The zipper came down with a long whisper. She lifted out bundles wrapped in clouded plastic, taped and retaped in a logic of fear. When they landed on the table, they sounded soft and final, like old hearts deciding to tell the truth. No one spoke for a count of breaths. The recorder's red eye woke and glowed. The clerk's hands moved with the grace of someone who measures grief in columns and makes it bearable. She broke the bundles with careful fingers, banded them fresh, counted in a voice that respected the room, and wrote each line with small neatness on a receipt the bank would honor and a judge would not need to squint at. Nothing theatrical, only exact. "Sign here," the clerk said. Mrs. Bell signed. Her name carved the page more than inked it. Darius signed an acknowledgement that looked like a boy writing the sentence he had avoided for years. Trina signed with a bite to her lip that pretended courage and confessed envy. The old officer called a bank manager, who answered like a man who lived for a tidy ledger. They traveled together, a modest convoy. Case locked. Clerk with cart. Partner behind. Sun warmed the bank's brass handle. Inside, the counting happened in a room with a camera and a second pair of eyes, and a machine that ticked like rain. The manager stamped forms with a satisfying thump. The seal bit. The ink dried. An instrument was issued. Numbers transmuted into something that would not mold in a shed. The clerk accepted it the way nurses accept a full vial, with respect for what it can save. Back in the room, paper had become fewer stacks and more certainty. The clerk apportioned the instrument across lines that mattered: return of marital gift, security for support, compensation for harm, written in the language of statutes that once felt cold and now felt like a held hand. Darius signed again. Trina initialed where tabs fluttered like small flags. Mrs. Bell placed her name a second time and stared at it as if it might run away. The old officer produced a restraining order that had been signed at dawn. No contact, no doorways, no messages sent on the backs of cousins. He slid it to Darius and met his eyes until understanding put down roots. "I understand," Darius said, and for the first time the words did not try to bargain. Lisa rose. She set her palm on the sealed envelope the bank had given and felt its cool weight, not heavy, not light, exactly earned. She gathered the reports. They seemed to weigh less, as if shared belief had taken some of the load. The keys in her hand no longer dug. They lay there like tools, not teeth. The partner opened the door. The old officer paused at the threshold. The envelope balanced on his fingers. "When the final decree come," he said, "bring it back. I like the sound the seal press makes when the right story gets its last mark." His mouth held the faintest smile. A man is allowed, after a hard night that ended correctly. They stepped into a city that had returned to itself. A bakery shed sugar into the air. Abusive. Someone laughed in a language made of mourning. In the car, Skye tied the red thread around her own wrist with slow determination. A ceremony of one, she showed it without a word. Lisa kissed the knot and felt something inside her settle like flour in a bowl. They took the familiar turn toward Crestwood. The hedge hummed with bees. The entrance smelled faintly of soap and sun-warmed vinyl. In the common room, the nurse had set a vase of daisies by the window and a single form on a clipboard with a sticky flag that said "Sign here." Nia sat in a soft chair with a book closed on her lap, looking at the stripe of light on the floor as if it were a staircase someone had drawn for her. Lisa placed the envelope on the table, not in the center, a little closer to Nia's reach, the way you slide a plate to family. Nia touched the edge, a fingertip tist, then tapped Skye's cheek and lifted the same finger to her own brow, completing a triangle. Only the three of them understood. "It is done," Lisa said. "The first chapter that counts to the court. Money moved where it can be tallied without shame. Orders inked. A judge who reads with both eyes open. We will find a place with windows that tell the truth." Nia nodded. She did not ask for amounts. Belief has its own currency. She slipped the envelope into the sleeve with the reports and pressed the lip flat. The old officer, who had come to the threshold and stopped as if the room itself were sacred, placed a copy of the custody log beside the vase. The nurse signed a simple acknowledgement and smiled the smile of someone who sees people come unstuck and then see them stand. Lisa sank into the chair across from Nia and let her shoulders drop the inch they had earned. Skye leaned on her side and looked through the window with the concentration of a scientist. Outside, a girl dragged chalk across the courtyard flagstones. A cloud pulled its own shadow, gentle as a sheet. "Not an ending," Nia said, low and almost amused. "The chapter where ink learns to stand." She let the words sit. The room seemed to agree. The light moved another inch along the floor without flicker. They lingered. There was no need to rush a quiet that had taken so much noise to reach. Paper would travel at the speed of its own surety. The law would walk in measured steps, and they would walk beside it, not behind. If a door tried to forget, they now held keys that did not cut. If a past tried to blur, they had records that would not smudge. If a night tried to return, they had a child's knot of red thread. and the knowledge of women who had learned to breathe with both lungs. When Lisa rose at last, she did it like a person standing from a table that had fed her. She lifted Skye's small hand, and the girl hopped down, ready to make a path out of squares. Nia leaned back, palms open on her thighs, eyes half closed, not escaping, only resting. The old officer's polish caught a stripe of sun as he stepped away. In the hall, the partners' laugh, braided with a rolling cart's wheels and the polite cough of a distant copier. The day continued. Justice would sign and the ink would stay. And when the world called again, whether with whisper or with siren, they would answer not with fury, but with evidence and patience and the practiced grace of people who had learned how to turn pain into paper and paper into doors that opened. The courthouse woke slowly, its corridors breathing the smell of paper and polish, its windows tinted with a pale, forgiving light. Lisa stood beneath the schedule board with Skye's small hand, laced in hers, and a folder of documents held tight against her chest. Nia waited on the bench nearby, quiet in her hospital cotton and borrowed cardigan, her posture steady, her gaze open. The old officer leaned by the wall, arms crossed, a calm shadow, watching everything without hurry. When the clerk called their case, the sound rang like a bell marking a clean beginning. Inside courtroom B, the air was still. The judge entered with a stack of files and a fountain pen that glimmered faintly in the morning light. Lisa's name, Skye's name, Darius' name, all were spoken into record, each word turning solid as it hit the room. Lisa stepped forward first. She placed her folder on the table, her movements exact, every page already numbered and clipped. The evidence told the story with the patience of truth. Hospital reports marked with initials, photographs plain and unedited, financial logs sealed in the bank's clean paper. The chain of custody documents sat on top, bearing the old officer's signature, an unbroken thread of accountability. The judge read carefully, his expression the practiced neutrality of someone who had seen too many stories twist themselves into knots. When he looked up, his eyes found Lisa's. "You are prepared," he said, not as flattery but as fact. "Yes, Your Honor," Lisa replied. Her voice did not waver. Across the aisle, Darius sat with his public defender, his posture bent slightly from the brace beneath his shirt. He looked smaller than he had ever allowed himself to appear. Trina sat behind him, expression locked tight. Mrs. Bell occupied the last seat in the row, her hands clasped around an empty canvas bag, her eyes distant and wet. The hearing moved forward in the rhythm of procedure. The clerk read each line of the dissolution petition. The judge asked his questions. Steady, careful, never cruel. Lisa answered in complete sentences. When asked about custody, she spoke of stability, of safety, of the small apartment already rented with the court's approval. When asked about support, she pointed to the account that now held the transferred funds, its details verified by the bank. Darius tried to interrupt once. A sound caught halfway between objection and plea. His defender's hand pressed his forearm. The judge lifted a finger. Silence returned like a blanket. The judge reviewed the reports, signed the custody order first. Then the dissolution. His pen moved slowly, pressing ink deep into the page. The seal press followed, metal arms closing with a soft, certain click. The decree emerged with the faint relief of embossed justice, a circle that caught the light like a coin freshly minted. Lisa bowed her head slightly, the gesture not of submission but gratitude. Her shoulders lowered. For the first time in years, she looked unburdened by waiting. The judge passed the decree to the clerk. "This marriage is dissolved," he said, his tone even, absolute. "Custody remains with the petitioner, support to be remitted per schedule. No contact until reviewed." The gavel touched wood. Not a slam, but a seal. Outside, the hall felt wider. The air was lighter, scented faintly with rain that had begun beyond the windows. Lisa accepted the certified copy of the decree. The seal under her fingers was cool, almost alive. Skye reached up and traced it with her fingertip, whispering, "It feels like a moon." Lisa smiled and nodded. "A moon that belongs to us." Nia rose from the bench. The old officer joined them as they walked out of the courthouse. Down the front steps, slick with drizzle. Across the street, a bakery vented warm air that smelled of sugar and cinnamon. Skye laughed quietly, her fear long replaced by curiosity. They crossed the road and met the bank manager waiting by the glass door. "A moon that belongs to us." Skye reached up and traced it with her fingertip. Lisa smiled and nodded. The account finalized, the inheritance funds secured in trust. Lisa signed with her new name, her own name. The pen glided without hesitation. When they left, the clouds had begun to thin. They walked 3 blocks to a brick apartment building that leaned into the light like it wanted to start over. The landlord met them on the stoop, holding a single brass key on a small ring. "Second floor, corner unit," he said. "Windows face east. Good morning, light." Inside, the space was modest, but alive with promise. 3 rooms, high ceilings, wood floors that creaked in 2 honest places. The kitchen smelled faintly of soap and lemon polish. The sink ran cold and clear. The windows opened without protest, and the locks clicked clean. Lisa set the decree on the counter and placed the salt jar on top to keep it flat. The gesture was instinct, a small domestic ritual that turned law into daily life. Skye explored each room with solemn focus, testing the echo, peering through the window at the branches of a nearby tree, tracing the pattern of light on the wall. Nia checked the space with practiced eyes, opening cupboards, peering behind doors, verifying the ordinary. "No secrets," she said softly. "No hidden boxes, just air." Lisa replied. They unpacked little things that made the apartment real. A kettle that whistled with surprise, a bowl the color of the sky, a folded blanket that once belonged to Nia, but now smelled like lavender instead of antiseptic. Skye lined up her colored pencils on the windowsill, arranging them from brightest to quietest. The old officer stopped by that evening, bringing an envelope sealed with the court's crest. "Final certified copies," he said. The judge asked for them to be delivered by hand. He took a slow look around the apartment. The clean floor, the tidy counter, the vase of daisies near the window, and nodded. "Looks right." Lisa accepted the papers and pressed her thumb to the raised seal. "Thank you," she said. The officer gave a small nod toward Nia. "You've done well," he said. "Both of you. The system doesn't fix hearts, but it gives them room to mend." When he left, rain began again, softer now, brushing the windows like the hush of an old lullaby. Skye curled on the rug, her eyelids heavy. Lisa tucked a red thread around the girl's wrist, a quiet circle of courage. Nia sat on the couch with a paperback law guide open across her knees. The words were dense, but she read slowly, tracing sentences as if they were doorframes. Not to become a lawyer, only to understand the language that once confined her and now protected her. Lisa stood by the kitchen counter, the decree resting in its sleeve beside the spoons. She opened the drawer, looked at it once more, then closed it gently. "Justice signed," she murmured, and the ink stayed. The apartment breathed in rhythm with the rain. The clock on the wall clicked softly, no longer counting down to anything. On the couch, Nia lifted her eyes. "Do you hear it?" she asked. Lisa listened. The rain, the steady ticking, Skye's even breathing, the sound of peace. Tentative, but real. "Yes," she said. the house is learning, and it learned the weight of quiet, the meaning of law, the shape of safety. It learned how to keep its own heartbeat. Outside, the rain eased into mist, the night folded around the windows without fear. In the hush between weather and sleep, the house practiced keeping its peace. And, for the first time in years, it did not have to try. The morning rose soft and silver, thin clouds drifting over the skyline like memory, refusing to fade. The apartment still smelled faintly of soup from the night before and of lavender from the blanket folded on the couch. Lisa woke before Skye and stood by the window, fingers wrapped around a mug that had cooled too soon. The decree lay sealed in its drawer, the settlement papers beneath it, flat and unremarkable, as though they were nothing more than grocery receipts. But their weight steadied her. It meant the world had been rewritten in her favor. Finally, Nia stirred on the couch. She blinked once at the light, then sat up, the law book still beside her. "You're awake early," Lisa said. "I didn't really sleep," Nia answered. "Hospitals get noisy in your head after a while. Even when you leave." Lisa smiled gently. "You can stay a little longer. You don't have to go yet." "I do," Nia said, stretching her shoulders. "Crestwood needs signatures and closure. They'll say I'm ready, and for once, they'll be right." By the time Skye woke, the kitchen smelled of toast and butter. She stumbled toward her mother, hair sticking in every direction, face soft, with the confusion of dreams. "It's not raining anymore," she murmured. "No," Lisa said, brushing a strand from her cheek. "Today's for light." They ate together without hurry. After breakfast, Nia packed a small canvas bag, the cardigan, the law book, a folded note. Lisa had slipped between the pages without a word. Outside, a car waited, sent by the old officer to take her back to Crestwood for the final evaluation. When she reached the door, she paused. "You'll be fine," Lisa said. "So will you," Nia replied, her voice low but sure. "Keep the doors open." They hugged, and Nia's breath trembled once before settling. Skye clung to her waist. "You'll come back?" the child asked. "Whenever the wind listens," Nia said, smiling. Then she stepped into the hallway, and the door closed behind her with the soft, final click of peace maintained. Lisa watched the car pull away through the window until it vanished beyond the bend of the street. The day stretched quiet and full. She washed the dishes, opened every window in the apartment to let the air move freely, and felt the space answer with its own breath. The curtains fluttered like sails. By afternoon, she gathered the old wooden box Clarissa had brought. She sat on the floor with Skye beside her and lifted the lid again. The photographs seemed softer in daylight, their edges less sharp. Skye traced the faces with a careful finger. "Are they bad people?" she asked. "They were," Lisa said. "Then they stopped being anything. That's what happens when people choose hate for too long. They fade." Skye nodded thoughtfully. "So we keep them to remember what not to do." Lisa smiled. "Exactly." From the box, she took the silver bird pendant and fastened it to a thin red thread, the same color Skye wore on her wrist. She tied it loosely around her daughter's neck. "There," she said. "It used to mean control. Now it means choice." Evening approached with gold pouring through the windows. The city outside sounded ordinary again. Cars, dogs, footsteps, laughter. Lisa opened the drawer by the counter, touched the decree once more, and whispered as if to the paper itself, "You're just ink now, but you used to be impossible." A knock came at the door. It was the old officer again, hat tucked under one arm. "Just checking," he said. Crestwood called. She signed, walked out smiling. "Paperwork's clean." Lisa felt her chest ease. "Thank you," she said. "For everything." He nodded. "Justice doesn't always roar. Sometimes it just shows up and stays a while." He tipped his hat, turned, and left her standing in the fading light. When Skye went to bed, Lisa sat by the window. The pendant caught the lamplight, swinging gently as if it remembered flight. She thought of Nia, how she had entered their lives like a storm and left like a still tide, steady and deliberate. She imagined her sister at Crestwood, signing the last form, holding the same pen that had once been used against her, reclaiming it stroke by stroke. On the counter, the law book lay open where Nia had left it. Lisa read the first line on the page. The law protects not perfection, but persistence. She closed it softly and smiled. Later that night, she wrote a letter, not to Darius, nor to the court, but to herself. She wrote about beginnings that hurt, about silence that had become courage, about a house that had learned how to breathe again. She folded the letter and slipped it inside the drawer with the decree. "For when I forget," she said aloud. The next morning dawned clear and sharp. Lisa dressed Skye for school, the first proper day since the move, and together they stepped into the sunlight. The street smelled of fresh pavement and bakery sugar. Skye waved at the landlord, who waved back. Ordinary. Lisa thought, perfectly, beautifully ordinary. As they walked, she noticed the world no longer tilted with fear. Each sound, the rumble of the bus, the hum of voices, the wind combing through leaves, belonged to the living, not the haunted. When they reached the school gate, Skye squeezed her mother's hand. "You'll come get me." "Always," Lisa said. She watched her daughter run into the crowd, red thread flashing against her wrist, like a heartbeat made visible. Then she turned homeward, sunlight warming her face. Back in the apartment, she opened the windows again. The air moved through, clean and whole. On the table, the law book waited. She turned a few pages, reading quietly, letting the words sink into her like seeds. There was no fear left in them, only instruction. Afternoon light softened the room. Lisa brewed a pot of tea and sat by the window, the city unfolding beneath her like a patient promise. For the first time, she allowed herself to imagine a future not as survival but as creation. A bakery, maybe, a small studio, something made with her hands and her will. The thought did not scare her, it anchored her. Outside, a bird passed the window, silver in the light. It caught the gleam of the pendant where it hung, and for a moment, it looked as if the two recognized each other. Lisa lifted her cup, steady and certain. "No more cages," she whispered. "No more secrets. Only doors that open." And somewhere, though she could not say where, a door indeed opened, the sound soft, like breath drawn by a world finally at rest. The apartment listened and kept the rhythm, practicing the quiet art of freedom. Every story of survival carries a quiet truth. Silence protects no one. In this tale, Lisa and Nia remind us that the moment we choose to speak, even with trembling voices, is the moment we begin to reclaim our power. For years, fear disguised itself as peace. Abuse hid behind family walls, and injustice wore the mask of keeping it together. But as the saying goes, the truth may walk slowly, but it always arrives. The sisters' journey shows that real healing doesn't come from revenge. It comes from courage, boundaries, and the decision to stop apologizing for existing. We live in a world where too many are told to endure quietly, to not make waves. Yet silence, when forced, becomes its own kind of prison. Breaking it, through honesty, law, or even a simple no more, is an act of self-respect. This story isn't just about women standing up to violence. It's about anyone who has ever been told they're too loud, too emotional, or too much. It's a reminder that our worth isn't determined by how much pain we can endure, but by how bravely we insist on being treated as human. So, if this story touched something in you, if it reminded you of your own fight, your own quiet defiance, share your thoughts below. Tell us what strength looks like in your life. Hit like if you believe no one should ever have to earn their safety. and subscribe to join us for more stories that challenge, heal, and inspire. May your week be calm, your heart steady, and your home a place where peace is not a visitor, but a permanent resident.